Don't call him Grandpa. He's just the neighbor, she said on the porch, loud enough for the whole street to hear. And just like that, something inside me cracked. I had just brought over the pie she liked, warm peach cinnamon, her favorite. But she didn't even look at me. She was standing there with her new school friends, older girls with sleek ponytails and cold eyes. I smiled, awkwardly, still holding the pie dish. One of them laughed. Wait, that's the guy you used to call Grandpa? She nodded quickly, too quickly. Yeah, he's not really my grandpa, just lives next door. The words stung more than they should have. But they did, because for the past 5 years I had been her grandpa in every way that mattered. I still remember the day I first heard her giggle from across the yard. She was barely tall enough to see over the fence. Alone, quiet. Her parents were always busy. Calls, flights, meetings. That kind of life where the calendar is full, but the home is empty. She wandered into my garden one morning, said nothing, just stared at the old swing hanging under the oak tree. Want to try it? I asked. She nodded, climbed on. I pushed her gently back and forth until her giggles filled the air like birdsong. From then on, she came over almost every day. We planted marigolds, painted rocks, fed the robins. I built her that swing for her 6th birthday, the one her parents forgot. She found it tied with red ribbon, and her eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. Thank you, Grandpa, she squealed, and that was the first time she called me that. I never corrected her. Didn't need to. It was simple, honest, warm, everything childhood should be. She never asked if I had grandchildren of my own. I didn't. She never asked if I was lonely. I was. But with her, those quiet mornings had color, meaning. I fixed her bike when she fell. Stayed up making handmade cards for her school projects. Once she drew a picture of me for Family Tree Day and taped it under the grandpa branch. I didn't show it to anyone, just kept it in my drawer. But kids grow, friends influence. And now she stood in front of me. No longer the girl in muddy rain boots and messy braids. She was taller, harder, and she had erased me with a sentence. I set the pie down on the porch rail. It's still warm, I said. She didn't answer. I turned and walked home. The swing swayed slightly in the breeze as I passed. Empty, like the space she'd left behind. Friends, let me take a short pause here. Would you mind sharing in the comments? Where are you listening from? Have you ever experienced something like this? Where someone you loved suddenly pushed you away? If this story touches your heart, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. That's how you help us grow this channel and keep bringing you stories that matter. Now, let's continue. Something changed after that school year began. I don't know what exactly, but I felt it the moment she walked past my gate without stopping. No cheerful wave, no skip in her step, no half-hummed melody from her favorite cartoon, just the crunch of her shoes on gravel and the soft click of the front door shutting behind her. It was a small thing, but after years of routine, even silence felt loud. The next day she didn't come by to check on the garden. The tomatoes had begun to ripen. She used to run to them with wide eyes, picking the reddest one like it was treasure. Now they just hung there, untouched, waiting. I told myself she was busy. New class, new teachers. Kids grow, they drift. But when I saw her again, it wasn't the same girl who used to braid flowers into her hair. She had makeup now, barely noticeable, but foreign on her young face. Her clothes had changed too. Sharper, trendier, like someone else had picked them out. But what struck me most was the way her eyes passed over me, like I was a stranger at a bus stop. Her friends trailed behind her, laughing about something I couldn't hear. The kind of high, mocking laughter teenagers use like armor. And then it happened. They stopped near my front steps, where I was kneeling to fix a loose stone in the path. I looked up, smiled out of habit. But before I could say a word, she turned slightly. Not toward me, but just enough for her voice to carry. That's just the neighbor. My real grandpa lives in the city. I felt the ground shift beneath my knees. Just the neighbor. 3 words. 3 knives. Her friends giggled, glanced at me like I was a lawn ornament. Nothing more. She didn't even look me in the eye. She didn't see the way I froze. Didn't notice the faint tremble in my hand as I lowered the wrench. She had practiced that sentence. It wasn't offhand. It was rehearsed. Chosen. I wanted to believe it didn't matter. That it was just teenage pride or insecurity or the pressure to belong. But it mattered to me. because I remembered the nights she fell asleep on my shoulder during fireworks, the tooth she lost in my kitchen while eating apple slices, the time she ran to my house in tears because she failed a spelling test, and I told her she was still the brightest star I knew. But now I was just the neighbor. I didn't say a word, I just smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they're trying not to fall apart in public. Then I stood, dusted off my hands, and went back inside. Behind me, the swing creaked in the breeze, but no one was on it. That night, I pulled the old photo album from the bottom drawer of the cabinet by the fireplace, the one with the small brass handle that always stuck. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe longer. I told myself I was just organizing, cleaning, keeping busy. But the truth is, I already knew what I was reaching for. I needed something to hold on to. The cover was worn, edges curling from years of quiet flipping. I opened it slowly, like it might crumble in my hands. The first photo was crooked. Her 5th birthday, frosting on her nose, 2 missing teeth, and her arms wrapped around me like I was the whole world. I remember how tight she squeezed that day. She told me the cake at home had been bought from a gas station. No candles. I made one from scratch. Vanilla with raspberry jam in the center. She said it tasted like summer. Next was the picture of her on the bike. No training wheels. I had held the seat for 20 straight minutes until her little legs found balance. The smile on her face when she turned around and saw I wasn't holding on anymore. That's the kind of thing a heart never forgets. There were more. Dozens. The school play where she played a tree. I still have the program with her name circled in red. The day she brought me a homemade medal that said, "Best Grandpa Ever" in glitter glue. I kept it in a box near my keys like it was made of gold. And yet, in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of her parents, I was no one. No bloodline, no paperwork, no official place at the table. Just an old man with a garden and too much time. Borrowed affection, borrowed joy, borrowed purpose. I stared at a picture of us on the front steps, her nestled under my arm, her head resting on my chest. Her parents weren't in the frame. They rarely were. But that picture, that moment, felt more real than most things in my life. I wondered bitterly what would happen to these photos when I was gone. Would she even remember them? Would she look back and smile? Or would she toss them aside, chalking them up to a phase, a neighborly kindness that went too far? I leaned back in the chair, album resting on my lap like a quiet weight. The house was silent except for the creak of the old clock on the wall and the occasional hiss of wind through the windows. Grief doesn't always arrive with funerals. Sometimes it comes in soft waves, looking at a picture you thought meant something to both of you and realizing maybe it only meant something to you. I closed the album gently, not because I was done, but because I couldn't look anymore. The pictures were real. The memories were real. But the bond? Maybe it was only borrowed after all. It began with silence, not the peaceful kind like the hush that settles after snowfall or the stillness before dawn. This silence was colder, sharper, a space where something used to live and had now been deliberately removed. She used to wave when she stepped out in the mornings, sometimes with coffee, sometimes in a rush, but always with a glance, a nod, a thread of connection. We weren't close, not in the way her daughter and I had been, but there was a mutual understanding, a quiet truce built over years of proximity. She knew I was there when they weren't, and she had let it happen, maybe even been grateful in her own way. But now she avoided eye contact altogether. No hellos, no small talk over the hedge, not even a glance as she hurried past with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in clipped, controlled tones. It didn't take long before I heard the first whisper, carried in fragments through the open window one afternoon. The two involved, always around, not even related. I stood in the kitchen, hands motionless on the sink, heart thudding in a strange, heavy rhythm. That evening I stepped outside to water the roses. I'd planted them long before she moved in, but her daughter had helped me name them. The red one was Brave, the yellow, Sunshine. The pale pink she had once tied a ribbon around and called Princess Bloom. Now I stood there alone, hose in hand, watching the water soak the dry soil. The roses had started to wilt a bit. Too much heat, not enough tending. I knew what they needed, but my hands felt heavier than usual, as if the ache inside had traveled into my bones. From behind the fence, I heard a door creak open, footsteps pause, and then nothing. No greeting, just the tension of presence without acknowledgement. They say you're too involved. The words echoed again, not from her mouth, but from somewhere in the air, like smoke that wouldn't lift. You're not even family. I'd heard versions of that before, years ago when my brother died and I showed up to help his widow. Thank you, but it's not your place. Later, when I volunteered at the library's children's corner, we appreciate the help, but parents prefer someone trained. And now again, different setting, same cold wall. It didn't matter how many birthdays I remembered, or how many bruised knees I bandaged, or how many nights I stayed up beside her with a flashlight and a book when the thunder scared her too much to sleep. The world doesn't tally love the same way it tallies blood. I turned off the hose. The ground was wet, but the flowers still drooped. I knew how they felt. Inside, I sat by the window and watched the house next door grow dim. No more visits, no little knocks at my door, no muddy footprints on my porch, just silence. The kind that settles not because something ended, but because someone decided you didn't belong anymore. It was a Tuesday, one of those heavy afternoons where the sky feels low and tired, and the air hangs too still. I'd spent the morning pruning back the ivy, trying to distract my thoughts with the shape of vines and the sound of shears, but my mind kept drifting, always back to her. It had been weeks since I last saw her up close. No visits, no laughter from the swing, no impulsive knocks at my door, asking if I had any cinnamon sticks for her hot chocolate. Still, a part of me held on like a child waiting for a door to creak open on Christmas morning. Hope has a cruel way of pretending its reason. That evening, I saw her sitting alone on the steps, staring at her phone. Her shoulders were tense, eyes fixed downward, but her foot tapped restlessly, like she was waiting for something, or maybe trying not to feel anything at all. I hesitated for a long time before walking over, a small package in hand. Inside was a necklace, not store-bought, just a simple handmade thing I'd crafted years ago from polished sea glass and twine. A tiny charm she once found on the beach and gave me, saying, "Keep this safe, Grandpa. It's magic." I'd kept it. Always planned to give it back when she was older. I guess I thought maybe now. Maybe she needed reminding. I walked up the steps slowly, gently calling her name. She looked up, and for a split second, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, memory, something small and soft. But it vanished almost immediately, like a candle snuffed out by wind. I held out the box, not saying much, just a quiet offering, a bridge. But she stood up abruptly, phone clutched tight in her hand like a shield. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice sharper than it had any right to be. I blinked. I thought you might—" "I don't need you anymore," she said, louder now. "I'm not a kid." The words were jagged, not just rejection, but deliberate cutting. I opened my mouth to answer, maybe to say, "I know you're growing, and that's okay. I just want you to know I'm still here." But before a sound left my throat, she yanked the screen door open and slammed it hard enough to rattle the frame. The sound echoed through my chest like thunder. I stood there for a moment, the box still in my hand, the quiet settling around me like dust. Then I turned, walked down the steps, and made my way back to my house. My knees ached, but I didn't notice, not compared to the ache rising behind my ribs. She was 13, and I was 70. And yet somehow, in that moment, I felt like the child. A child who'd just been told that magic wasn't real. That love had limits. That family was a title you had to earn through blood, not years of devotion. Inside my home, I placed the box back in the drawer where it had waited all these years. The sea glass charm glinted in the lamplight, small and still and useless. I sat in my chair, listening to the creak of the old floorboards, and tried not to cry. But there are some doors that, once slammed, echo far too long. That Saturday I woke early, even before the birds. The house was still dim with morning blue, but my hands moved from habit, muscle memory carved from years of little traditions that no longer had a place. I boiled water for tea, wiped down the counter, and reached for the old recipe card she once decorated in purple marker. The corners were smudged now, one side torn where she had tried to fix it with glue. Her handwriting danced across the paper. Messy, crooked, but mine, ours. Strawberry vanilla swirl, extra cream cheese in the frosting. She used to say it tasted like a hug. I baked slowly, carefully, not because I needed to, but because the rhythm gave me something to hold on to. I remembered how she used to sit on the counter, legs dangling, sneaking bits of batter when she thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes she'd smear frosting on my nose and laugh so hard she'd snort. "I'm going to be a baker like you," she told me once, "but I'll add rainbow sprinkles and hide jelly beans inside." Back then it felt like we had endless time, like the world couldn't touch us inside that little kitchen. By noon the cake was done, golden and light, with bright red swirls curling through the layers like ribbons. I let it cool near the window, just like always. The frosting was thick, sweet, and perfectly smooth. I even added the tiny sugar flowers she once picked out at the store, pink and yellow, slightly tacky, but she loved them. I set the table for two, poured the tea, cut 2 generous slices. I opened the curtains, just in case she looked over from her window, just in case her feet brought her back out of habit. I waited. The clock ticked louder than usual. The room, though bright, felt dimmer somehow. I reheated the tea twice, rearranged the flowers, looked out the window until my eyes blurred. But she didn't come. Not in the first hour. Not in the second. Not at all. No knock on the door. No giggle down the path. No voice calling, "Is the cake ready, Grandpa?" Just the faint sound of traffic in the distance and the rustling of trees. The kind of silence that feels thick with absence. Not peaceful, just hollow. I sat down and stared at her untouched slice. The one with the best swirl. I had saved it for her, like always. But it cooled, and the frosting dried, and the air grew still again. After a while I picked up her plate, walked it back to the kitchen, and placed it gently in the fridge. I didn't throw it away. I couldn't. That night I left the porch light on just in case. Not because I thought she'd come, but because part of me needed to believe there was still warmth to offer. A cake is just flour and eggs and sugar. But that day it held all the pieces of a fading memory. And I sat in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the smell of strawberries and silence, trying to figure out how something that sweet could feel so much like grief. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and washed out, the kind of day when the clouds hang low, like they're carrying something too heavy to release. I had just finished folding the porch cushions, a quiet ritual I still did, though no one sat with me anymore. The swing creaked slightly in the wind, a hollow echo of what used to be laughter. The phone rang inside, its sound sharp, out of place. Most days it didn't ring at all. Most people I once spoke to were either gone or fading into long silences of their own. When I picked up, I already knew who it was, not by name, but by the weight in the air. Her father's voice was clipped, tired, like he didn't want to be making the call any more than I wanted to answer it. He didn't begin with hello. "Please stop showing up," he said flatly. "You're confusing her." That was it. No context. No thank you for the years I filled in the gaps they left. No acknowledgement of the birthdays, the scraped knees, the hundreds of hours spent reminding a child that she mattered. Just that. A polite erasure, disguised as concern. I didn't say a word. Not because I agreed. Not because I didn't feel the storm building in my chest. But because I knew that anything I said would be held against me, twisted, diluted. And worse, it wouldn't change a thing. So I stood there, in the kitchen where she once spilled juice on the floor and cried until I let her use my favorite dish towel to clean it up. Where she once stood barefoot on a stool to help me crack eggs. And I said nothing. He hung up. No goodbye. Just the click. Final. Indifferent. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was declaration. Whatever thread had remained between our homes was now officially cut. I stood there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear even though the line had gone dead. There's something strange about silence that follows rejection. It doesn't sound like nothing. It sounds like absence wearing a suit. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the leaves into spirals across the path she used to run barefoot down in summer. It's strange how a child can fill a life, and how quickly that same child, with words not even her own, can be turned into someone else's secret, hidden away like a shameful memory, no longer welcome, no longer claimed. I sat down slowly, the ache in my knees, nothing compared to the hollowness in my chest. For years I had made space in my heart for her, built a room just for her laughter, her fears, her joy. Now that door was closed, locked from the outside, and I had no key. The storm came in fast, rolling over the hills like an angry tide. The sky darkened to a deep bruise, and the wind rose until the trees groaned and bent like old men clutching their backs. Rain hammered the windows in sheets, and thunder split the air like distant gunfire. I sat by the window with a candle burning low, watching as the power flickered, once, twice, then died. The house went quiet. No hum of the refrigerator, no tick from the old wall clock, just wind, rain, and the slow beat of my own heart echoing in the silence. It had been weeks since I heard from her. The swing outside remained motionless. Her laughter had vanished from my garden like it had never lived here. But even then, even in the stillness, some part of me still listened for her, hoped for her. Then it came. A scream, sharp, panicked. Not a movie scream, not something playful or distant. This was real, raw, young. It cut through the storm like lightning through the dark, and I knew that voice. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the flashlight from the cupboard, the same one I'd used during all those nights when she was small, and storms used to scare her so badly she'd run to my door in socks, trembling. I ran into the rain, across the yard, barely feeling the cold bite against my skin. My slippers soaked through instantly, but I didn't care. The gate was already swinging open in the wind, and I took the steps 2 at a time. No lights, just blackness. I pounded on the door. Nothing. Then I tried the side, where I knew the kitchen door sometimes stuck. It wasn't locked. Inside, the house was darker than I'd ever seen it. The beam from my flashlight barely cut through the shadows. I called her name, but the wind and rain outside swallowed it. Then I heard it again, a faint cry. Upstairs. I moved fast. The staircase groaned under my feet. Every step felt like walking through years. Years of memories, years of distance. At the top, her door was closed, but I saw the flicker of light under the frame. I tried the handle. Jammed. I pressed my ear to the door. "Help!" she sobbed from the other side. "I can't get out." My heart clenched. "It's me," I said gently. "I'm here." I heard her gasp. Her voice shook. "Grandpa?" She hadn't said that word in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Almost. "I'm going to open the door, okay? Step back." I pressed my shoulder to the frame and shoved. Once, twice, until finally it gave with a loud crack. The door burst inward, and she was there, in the center of the room. Flashlight long dead, hugging herself, shaking like a leaf in the wind. She ran to me without hesitation. I caught her in my arms, just like I used to. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed, all the years and cold words melting into tears. The storm howled behind us, but inside that room time stood still. "I couldn't find anyone," she whispered. No one answered. I didn't know what to do. I said nothing. I just held her, tighter than I had in years. Because even if they erased me on paper, even if they told her I didn't belong, in the dark, when the world had gone silent, she still reached for me. And in that moment, I was still her grandpa. An hour later, the storm had passed, but the weight it left behind lingered like fog in the soul. The rain had quieted to a whisper against the windows, and the power was still out, so my living room glowed softly with candlelight. Shadows danced along the old wallpaper, and the tick of the wind-up clock was the only sound breaking the stillness. She sat curled on my couch, knees tucked up, wrapped in the old quilt with faded blue stars, the one I gave her when she was barely tall enough to climb onto the sofa by herself. She used to call it her magic blanket. Back then, she believed it could protect her from anything: thunder, bad dreams, even the monsters her parents refused to believe in. Now she held it tightly, like maybe it still had something left in it. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen but quiet. Not a single word had been spoken since I brought her home. I'd made her a cup of warm milk, set it gently beside her, but she hadn't touched it. Her fingers just clutched the edge of the blanket, knuckles white. I sat across from her, not too close, just enough so she could reach me if she wanted. My heart felt too full and too broken at once. It ached with every stolen glance I took at her, seeing both the child she had been and the young girl she was becoming, the one who had once trusted me with every secret, and the one who had erased me with a single sentence on the porch. Minutes passed, then more, and then, without looking up, her voice, cracked and barely audible, broke the silence. "I didn't mean it," she whispered. My breath caught, but I didn't rush her. I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't need to. I already knew. She kept her eyes on the blanket, like she couldn't bear to meet mine. I thought I was supposed to push people away to grow up," she said. "They said I was too attached to you, that I needed to stop acting like a little kid. So I did. I tried, but it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong after that." Her voice wavered. She wiped at her cheek, but the tears kept falling, steady and slow. "I kept seeing the swing, and the garden, and the cake you made. I saw them, but I didn't let myself miss them. I thought if I missed you, it meant I was weak. But I do miss you. I missed you every day." Still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew words, in that moment, were fragile things. And sometimes silence offers more safety than 1,000 reassurances. "I'm sorry," she added, "for all of it." I nodded gently. Just once. Not to say everything was fixed, not to erase the ache, but to show her I was still here, still rooted, still waiting, because love that is real doesn't vanish with slammed doors or angry words. It bends, it bruises, but it stays. She looked up then, finally, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment neither of us was a child or an old man. We were just two souls, wounded but reaching. Outside, the clouds were beginning to part. A faint light peeked through the edge of the sky. Inside, something softer was blooming too. Not a return to what once was, but maybe the beginning of something that could be again. Not because everything was okay, but because sometimes, in the quiet after the storm, what matters most is who's still sitting beside you. The knock wasn't gentle. It came like a warning. 3 hard, impatient pounds against the front door that made the old frame shudder. I had known they'd come. The storm might have rattled the windows, but this was the aftershock I feared more. She stirred on the couch beside me, still wrapped in the blanket, her head resting on the pillow she used to claim as her own. Her eyes, red and swollen from tears, met mine, startled but not surprised. Before I could rise to answer, the door swung open. They didn't wait. Her parents stood in the doorway, wind still clinging to their coats, rain dripping from their hair. Her mother looked pale with panic. Her father's eyes burned with something sharper. Anger or fear, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. "What the hell is going on?" he barked, his voice slicing through the soft stillness of the room. "Why is she here?" I stood slowly, not raising my voice, not defending myself like a man on trial. Though that's exactly what I was in their eyes. "She was scared," I said quietly. "The storm knocked the power out. She was trapped. She called for help." "She should have called us," he snapped back. "Not." He didn't finish the sentence, but the way he glanced at me, as if I were something shameful, dangerous, inappropriate, said more than words could. He stepped forward, reaching for her. "Come on, we're going." But she didn't move. Not right away. Instead, she looked at him, and then at me. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I saw it. A spark. A line of strength forming in the soft edges of her face. "I don't want to go yet," she said, voice small but steady. Her father blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "You're coming. Now." She clutched the edge of the blanket tighter. "He helped me. When I was crying and alone," and her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "And you weren't there." Her mother stepped in now, softer, trying to smooth over what had already cracked. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. This isn't about love. It's about boundaries. We've told you. But her daughter shook her head. Number, you told me he's just the neighbor. You told me it was wrong to miss him. But he's the only one who ever noticed when I was sad, who remembered my birthdays, who taught me to be brave when you were too busy. Silence. Thick, awkward, exposing. Her father stood frozen, as if uncertain whether to be angrier at her rebellion or ashamed of what she was saying. And I said nothing, because nothing I could say would carry the weight of her truth. She stood then, slow and trembling, still wrapped in the quilt. She walked toward them, but didn't let them take her hand. She paused in the doorway, turned back to me, and gave a nod. Small, almost invisible, but I felt it in my chest like a sunrise. They left in silence. She walked out on her own. But for the first time, it wasn't because she was being pulled. It was because she had chosen how to stand. And in that quiet, once they were gone, I sat back down, not defeated. Because she had remembered. Not just the swing, not just the cake, but me. And that meant something was still alive. Even if the world didn't want it to be. It had been 7 days since the storm, since she stood in the doorway and chose not to look away, since the house, once aching with silence, had echoed with a voice that remembered me. I hadn't heard from her since. No messages, no calls, no knocks on the door. And though I told myself not to expect anything, not to hope again, I still found myself glancing out the window every afternoon, still setting out 2 teacups, then quietly putting one away when the sky dimmed. That Sunday, the garden was unusually quiet. The swing hadn't moved in days. I had just finished clipping the wilted ends off the marigolds when I heard the gate open. I turned slowly, unsure if my mind was playing tricks again. But there she was, alone. No parents, no voices trailing behind her. Just her, standing small but certain, holding the gate in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. She didn't speak right away, just walked forward, eyes on me the whole time, and then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, she stepped into the living room, sat on the old couch, and placed the letter on her lap. My breath caught when I saw it. I knew that paper. It was hidden in the back drawer of my desk, beneath a bundle of old receipts and a cracked magnifying glass. I had written it years ago, not for her to read, but for myself. Late one night, when the house felt too big and my heart too quiet. A letter meant only for silence. She looked up, her eyes already welling. "I found this in the drawer," she said softly. "The one near the garden books." I opened my mouth to explain, maybe even apologize, but she began reading aloud, her voice breaking gently with every line. "You were the light in my retirement. The reason I woke up early to make pancakes. The reason I smiled at cracked drawings and built a swing with my bare hands at 70. You never owed me anything. I don't need to be your grandpa. I'm just grateful. You let me feel like one." She paused, swallowing hard. The room was quiet enough to hear the soft rustling of the letter in her hands. Tears slipped down her cheeks, one by one, not loud, not dramatic, just honest. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know you felt all of that." I sat down beside her, not touching her, just breathing in the weight of the moment. My hands trembled slightly, folded in my lap. "You were the only thing that made me feel like I mattered," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And even when they took you away, I never stopped being proud. Not for a second." She reached out then, slowly, like the gesture scared her, and placed her hand over mine. It was small, warm, familiar. "I'm sorry," she said again, "for forgetting, for making you feel like you didn't count." I shook my head. "You never forgot me. You just didn't know how much space you took up in here," I said, tapping my chest. She laid her head on my shoulder like she used to when the world felt too big, and we sat there. No storm, no noise, no expectations, just a girl who had found her way back, and an old man who never stopped waiting, not because he needed to be called Grandpa, but because once a little girl made him feel like one, and that feeling, that was enough to build a life around. That morning, the sky was a pale promise, soft light filtering through clouds as if the world itself had paused to watch. I stood in the crowded hallway of her school, hands trembling around the straps of my worn leather satchel, as children and parents milled past like a river of expectations. I hadn't planned to come. I almost stayed home, uncertain whether I belonged in a world that once told me my place was across the fence, not inside a classroom. When her teacher announced special guardians instead of parents, my heart lodged in my throat. The phrase was small, almost casual, but it carried a weight I'd never felt before. I rose from my seat at the back, each step up the aisle echoing memories. The first day she arrived here as a shy child, trembling. The way we'd practiced her spelling words in my living room, the sunsets we'd chased in the garden. She stood at the front beside her classmates, holding my hand so tightly I felt the pulse of her courage and fear. Her eyes were bright, wet with unshed tears, but determined. As the room fell silent, I saw her lips part, and a voice steadied itself with years of lessons, learned under my patient tutelage. She spoke of kindness, of small acts that carve meaning into empty days. She spoke of laughter, of scraped knees made better by a steady hand. And then she paused, breath catching like a bird in a storm, before delivering the line that filled every hollow space in me. This is the man who taught me what love looks like. At that moment, the applause wasn't just for a speech. It was a chorus of acceptance, sweeping through every corner of my being. I felt warmth bloom beneath my skin, a fragile new garden of hope. Her classmates' eyes glistened with surprise. Her teacher's smile was something like pride. And I realized that, in that room, I was more than a neighbor. I was family recognized. When the applause faded, she squeezed my hand and leaned in close. No words were needed. In her embrace afterward, I felt all the years of distance wash away, replaced by a bridge stronger than any door slammed or whispers behind the fence. In the echo of that morning's light, I understood. Blood binds some, but love chooses us all. And on that stage, in front of dozens of witnesses, we chose each other again. That next morning, the air felt lighter, as if the world had exhaled alongside us. I was in the garden, trimming the hedges, when I heard her mother's soft footsteps on the path, hesitant, unsteady. I didn't turn around. I kept my shears paused mid-cut, waiting. She stood there a moment, watching me work. The sun caught her hair, turned it to honey. For a long beat, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped closer, voice low and raw. I didn't realize how much you meant to her. Her words trembled between us, unsteady like the first notes of a song played on an untuned piano. I set the shears on the table, the metal resting cold under my palm. I took a breath, but didn't answer. Instead, I pointed slowly, deliberately, to the swing beneath the oak. The rope still swayed, the seat moving in gentle arcs, as if someone had just hopped off and left it humming in the breeze. She followed my gesture, eyes moistening as she remembered. That swing had carried years of laughter, morning giggles when the dew was still on the grass, afternoon swoops when the sun was high, evening creaks long after everyone else had gone inside. Her mother let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She took a step forward, reached out and touched one of the ropes, fingers brushing the frayed twine I'd replaced last summer. A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting her, but I didn't see what you gave her." The swing moved again as if in answer. It was a simple thing, a piece of wood and rope, but it carried all the weight of afternoons spent weaving stories into the sky, of scraped knees healed with a bandage and a smile, of secrets shared in warm breezes. I watched her, the woman who had once seen me as nothing more than a friendly neighbor, now seeing me as a guardian of something precious. "You kept her safe," she said, voice breaking, "when we couldn't." I nodded once, not to boast, not to thank her, but to acknowledge the truth we both had learned too late, that love isn't measured by blood, but by the spaces we fill in each other's lives. She stood there a while longer, silent, tracing the curve of the seat with her fingertip. Then she turned and walked back toward her house, leaving the garden, leaving the swing bathed in golden morning light. And as I watched her go, I understood that some apologies don't need words. They need moments. Quiet, honest, shared beneath the rustle of leaves and the gentle sway of something built with care. The swing whispered in the breeze, carrying memories that neither time nor regret could ever erase. The next afternoon they came again, this time not with anger or rain-soaked coats, but with a stack of papers heavy in their folder. I was sitting at my kitchen table, where the morning light turned the wood grain golden, sipping tea I'd poured for both of us even before they arrived. She slipped inside, clutching her mother's hand, her eyes bright yet solemn, as if she understood this moment was more important than any storm or slammed door. Her father placed the folder before me with a careful sort of reverence, like it contained something sacred rather than just ink on paper. He cleared his throat, voice softer than I'd ever heard, and began explaining the documents. Power of attorney so I could make decisions if something ever happened to them. Emergency contact, so I would be the first they called if she needed help. Visitation rights, so there was no question that my time with her was protected by law. Each phrase landed like a stone in my chest, small, sharp, reshaping the landscape of our relationship forever. I looked at the forms, lines, and signatures waiting for my name, and I felt tears behind my eyes. Not because the law could bind what the heart already knew, but because it finally said aloud what had lived unspoken between us for so long, that I mattered, that my place in her life wasn't a courtesy or a mistake to be corrected, but a choice they willingly affirmed. I lifted the pen, steel in hand, and signed each line with a trembling conviction, as though marking every letter could seal a promise in red ink, never again erased, always recognized. She watched me, her small hand sliding into mine across the table, her thumb brushing the back of my hand like a benediction. In that moment, paper and ink and signatures could fall away, but the weight of what we'd claimed for each other would remain. I folded the documents carefully and handed them back, my voice tight but steady as I whispered, "Thank you for giving me this gift." She squeezed my hand, and her parents stood beside us, 3 faces etched with relief and newfound understanding. Outside, the garden bloomed in late summer splendor, roses and marigolds nodding in the breeze as if celebrating with us. The swing under the oak tree, once abandoned, hung still and silent, no longer a symbol of neglect, but a promise of afternoons yet to come. And in the hush that followed, I realized that respect isn't just spoken in warm words. Sometimes it's written in ink, signed with intent, and carried in the steady clasp of someone's hand. That day, the papers on the table weren't just legal forms. They were the map of a family reborn. That Sunday morning, sunlight poured through the lace curtains in long golden bars, and I was leafing through the garden book she had given me years ago when I heard her soft footsteps on the porch. I looked up to see her standing there in that shy way she had as a child, shoulders relaxed, eyes bright with a quiet certainty I hadn't seen in a long time. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, pressing her cheek against my shoulder as though she were rediscovering a place she had always carried in her heart. When she pulled back just enough for me to see her face, she smiled. No awkwardness, no hesitation. "Grandpa," she said, making the single word heavy with everything it had lacked. Acknowledgement, belonging, and love without asterisks. Not neighbor, not pretend. Just Grandpa. And in that instant, all the years of slammed doors, whispered doubts, and empty swings fell away, leaving only the pure, unspoken bond we had always shared. I felt something inside me break and then bloom at once. Tears I had held back for so long finally spilling free, warm against my skin. They ran down my cheeks, silently unashamed and honest, as she reached up to brush one away with the back of her hand. We stood there in the quiet of the morning, 2 souls woven together by moments no legal paper could ever capture. The laughter that once echoed through the garden, the midnight stories by flashlight during storms, the simple comfort of a hand held in the dark. Because sometimes love isn't something you earn with bloodlines or documents. It's a choice, day after day, moment after moment. And that morning, as she stood before me, calling me Grandpa, I knew with unwavering certainty that the truest families are those we choose, those we nurture, and those we never let go of. In her embrace, I was home again.